Welcome to Growth for Good, the show about amplifying impact for nonprofits, charities, and social purpose businesses. I'm Daniel Francavilla, a marketing advisor and brand strategist and your host. On this show, I interview leaders at nonprofits and social enterprises and the organizations that support them. We discuss the wins, challenges, and best practices when it comes to communications, marketing, fundraising, and impact. Let's dive into today's episode. All right, Rohit, welcome to Growth for Good.
Thank you.
Awesome. So Rohit, I'd love if you could start off by talking to us about DoGood Fundraising. And I love how we're on Growth for Good and the organization or the company is DoGood. So what exactly is DoGood in a quick sentence?
For sure. So we raise money for charities and nonprofits to help them amplify their impact. And it's a social enterprise that was started 4 years ago.
Amazing. 4 years ago, what year was that?
2019.
2019. So when you first started DoGood, what was your initial goal with the business? How did you actually come up with the idea?
So Daniel, I spent a lot of time in the nonprofit sector, I would say most of my life. And I had a lucky opportunity to sit on the grant review team of the Ontario Trillium Foundation. So when I was busy reviewing and assessing grants as a volunteer, I spent a lot of time understanding what makes a strong grant and what makes a weak grant.
Right.
And then in the community, I started sharing that knowledge as a fundraising professional. And folks would say to me, Rohit, you should do more with this. You should start a business. And at the time, I didn't believe that I had the skills or knowledge to do so. But it became more and more apparent that I had to share this with the world, and so I started this business with the help of the Brampton Entrepreneur Center. And today it's a growing business.
Amazing, yeah, and you're still doing it, which is amazing. Now, prior to that, of course, you understood the need for funding and the challenges organizations face. So, tell us about a little bit of what led up to that. What was your past history before starting DoGood?
Yeah, so I had the lucky opportunity to be mentored by someone named Stephanie Crocker, EcoSource, and I got involved very early with nonprofits and charities and started looking for a way to make change through those organizations as a medium. And I found that many organizations had staff who were burning out. Many of them struggled significantly with finances and with being able to generate money. Sometimes we were doing things that didn't make sense. So we were, putting on bake sales, so to speak, and fundraising events where so much time and effort went into it that it wasn't raising money the way it should be. And so that sparked something in me 15, 16 years ago to start thinking about how could we do good work and raise more money. And so I think from the early days of nonprofit work, it got me thinking about how we could raise money differently and how we could put in less manpower up front, but then generate money that would fund the good work that had to happen at the front lines. And so it was a natural progression from being involved in the nonprofit sector to want to come up with a way to make change. And I always felt that grants and funds being given to an organization would make a lot of an impact, a lot more impact than some of the fundraisers that I'd seen over the years.
Right. So more effective use of the time and resources, obviously. And, if you really want organizations to be able to make, sustainable change, they need more funding than just individual small events, which is great. Now, you've worked with, I'm going to say hundreds of organizations at this point. What are some of the causes or initiatives that you're actually personally passionate about?
Yeah, I would say one that's very close to me is food insecurity. And so I had the opportunity to work for Save a Food Bank, which is one of our clients today. They do really great work in Mississauga, and the word Seva means selfless service, which is pretty important in my culture. And so food insecurity is a big one, having worked within that organization. And then now we write grants for them, and, we've helped them to actually launch and grow their work and their impact and continuing to do so. Another one has to be decent work. So I was reflecting on it in preparation for our conversation today, and I thought, I want people to be happy at work. I want them to make more than just a living wage. And I want them to be contributing towards something bigger. And I talk a lot about social enterprise as a business model, so we can make money and do good work, right?
Right.
And I think the making money part is straightforward, but the doing good part is about treating people well and making sure that they're in careers that are actually meaningful, where they're going to grow and where they're going to grow to the next stage in their career. And I think we can all contribute to the better good, to improving society, to helping people in our work. And so beyond food security, it's about decent work and meaningful work, meaningful jobs where people are fulfilled in their work. That's pretty important.
That's amazing. And I think right now, what's happening over the last few years, the pandemic was kind of one thing that changed a little bit of the employment landscape. But even now, the economic situation is different. There's the whole remote work, and the way that roles are even valued and considered has changed drastically. So it's definitely something that needs to be brought to the forefront for sure. Now, you've been an active kind of, entrepreneur, activist, volunteer, your whole life since you were a student for sure. For someone getting started in the nonprofit world, let's say, how important is that? Being a public face, your personal brand. Some people don't think about it at the time. You probably just were out there doing stuff because you're passionate. Yeah. But how important does that role play now that you're kind of running your business 4 years in?
Right. And I wouldn't call myself a branding strategist. I think I've been learning along the way about how to build a personal brand. And, I've attended one of your workshops on how to build a personal brand. I look to experts on that piece. Some of the things I picked up very early: set a brand and establish that brand across all your social media. So my brand is Do Good. If you go on my Twitter, if you go on my Facebook, the public piece of it, I don't spend a lot of time complaining or putting out negativity. It is about positive messaging, sharing good work, showcasing good things. That's how I've designed my brand. I've designed it to be in line with my values. And I think that we can all work on creating a brand that is clearly communicated across personal websites, social media, personal platforms. And I look for that when I'm trying to get to know somebody who I'm doing business with or an organization that I'm working with. I go on their different platforms and I see, what's out there, what's in their branding.
Yep.
And I think the most important thing is to be consistent across all the platforms. So if you go on Rohit Do Good, which is sort of my personal brand, you'll see the same consistent messaging and consistency across. And it is about showcasing good work and trying not to be negative or trying not to complain about the world's problems, but actually spinning it in a positive light and showcasing people who are doing good work around those problems.
Yeah, and there's actually, I love that angle, and we need more positive news and progress being shared. There's a whole publication that I subscribe to called the Good newspaper, and they have a print edition and online edition, and that's what they're focused on, is like telling these positive stories. Like, yes, there are parts of the world that are totally falling apart, but here are all the advancements that are also being made. All right, so for organizations of any size, there's going to be challenges, right? There's going to be things that you face at the beginning stage, at the expansion stage, scaling stage. What are, first of all, you can give some examples of any challenges you've gone through with organizations, but also, your advice that you would have to others in your situation.
Okay, so I think capacity is a big one. And in our social enterprise, we really exist to build capacity. That's one of the main reasons why DoGood Fundraising exists. Many organizations are sometimes not ready to apply for grants. They're not ready to communicate with funders. I would start with the basics. When you're applying for funding or applying for any sort of money, understand what you need the money for, why you're applying, and if you had that money, specifically, what would you spend it on? These are basic capacity things that funders look for. When it comes to organizational growth, I find that succession planning is something that most leaders don't think about. So I was talking to one of our clients yesterday, and I said, in a few years, you may not be in this role. Right. Some of your staff may step up, and one of them would become the executive director. Are you prepared for that? And he laughed, and he said no. And and I think most organizations aren't. We just assume that somebody is going to be hired, and they're going to solve everything. And we're seeing less and less people who want to go into leadership roles in the nonprofit sector because they know the pay isn't as competitive and they know that there's a lot of burnout. And so I think organizations need to look within their own staff right now at who is a potential leader and start training them and start doing the team huddles and bringing them into management meetings and maybe bringing them into a board meeting and teaching them everything so that if the current leadership of the organization has to move on or retire, or unfortunately, if they burn out, you need to have somebody who's willing to step in. Otherwise, all of your clients who rely on you for your services, they will, inevitably struggle. So I think capacity and succession planning are the two big ones.
Amazing. And with that being said, those are both things that you need to do preventatively or proactively, right? So we see a lot of organizations looking for support when it's like too late, when they've like lost people or where they realize that, someone's transitioning out of a role and they don't actually have anyone there. So those are super important challenges that I think the sector definitely faces for sure. On another note, in this sector, it's so important that we celebrate success and showcase our impact, right? Showcase our wins, showcase, the impact we're making in the community. What are a couple of examples or one example from DoGood's clients and DoGood's work that you could share?
Yeah, so I think the Same Food Bag is the one I love to talk about. It's one of my favorite organizations to work with because I've seen them grow over the years. And ever since we worked with them, we have doubled their budget. Through our work together,
Amazing.
Through the work that we've done with funding applications, we've managed to double that budget, and that's huge. That's a big deal. They'll be opening a new space in 2023 with a significant grant that we were able to help secure, and I think that's a huge win. To get organizations past the $1 million mark is huge. The other one I'm really proud of is that we have raised almost $7 million to date for nonprofits and charities. Thank you. So having done that, to me, I'm not a philanthropist that can donate millions of dollars, but to have built an organization that then raised that much money and was able to give that to charities and nonprofits is huge.
That's huge. And those and to put that into context for everyone, like that's real, actual cash going to their hands. It's not, promised money. It's not, long-term donations. It's not in-kind gifts. That's actual funding that goes directly into their budgets, which helps then increase additional impact, right, to show what they can do with that money. So that's incredible.
Thank you so much. And I think with the structure that we have now as a social enterprise, we're trying to address the capacity issues. We're trying to make things more efficient. Very soon I'll be probably announcing that we've raised maybe 10 million and then we keep going bigger and bigger. And I think in the process, what we hope to do is try and change the funding landscape, how funders communicate with nonprofits and how that conversation goes. We'd like to have a hand in that in the future to ensure that the groups that need the funding the most are getting time with funders, something that doesn't always happen. Right.
To kind of ensure that they're meeting those requirements and fulfilling the actual intention of the funding, right? So are you seeing since, just in general with grant funding that's been out there since the pandemic, have you seen that funding is more specific, more open-ended? Like what's some of if you can give the sector some of your insights on that?
It's very specific. It's COVID specific. So everything is COVID recovery, economic recovery, economic resilience. We found that when COVID started, people weren't really sure what was happening. They thought maybe this will last for a few months and stuff. Now, being almost 3 years in, we've seen that many grants that are out there are exclusively in response to the challenges. So the Resilient Communities Fund by the Ontario Trillium Foundation, we're just working on round 5 right now. Round 5. They've never had a grant that had rounds and rounds and rounds in this sense. And we've seen other COVID recovery money come back. There's one big grant that we're waiting for. Everyone's waiting for it. It's called the Community Services Recovery Fund. That would be the biggest COVID recovery grant ever unleashed in Canada. $400 million. So the trend has been giving organizations a chance to recover pivot, adapt from the impacts of COVID. And I don't think it's actually going to stop anytime soon. I actually think it's going to continue right into 2023.
Wow. And so some of that has shifted, and I'm assuming now organizations, because it has been almost 3 years, have been able to, adapt their operations accordingly.
Some yes, some no. I would say in 2020, in December of 2020, 1 in 5 nonprofits was ready to shut down its doors.
Wow.
Close its doors. So we have to continue to adapt to the new reality. Things are happening from home. People are burnt out. Mental health issues are rampant. And the issues have changed, actually. COVID has changed so many issues. I was listening to a talk by the former mayor of Calgary, who said that every day during the pandemic, a billionaire was created, which tells you a lot about income inequality and income disparity. And so, the have-nots are now squeezed even tighter. We're heading into a recession potentially. They're being squeezed even tighter. So the organizations that serve the most vulnerable populations are struggling to meet the demand, and funding isn't always as adaptive and as readily available. And that's why we have new models emerging like social enterprise, where you can sell a good or service and take some of the proceeds from that and use it to fund your operations when there's not enough money out there to fund everything entirely.
Right. And then we see, with the goal being sustainability, right? Self-sustainability, right? When you have your own supporters, your own products and services that you sell, to be able to generate, that recurring income that's not specifically relying on grants, which is amazing. For someone who is considering working, in the career of starting in a nonprofit or even starting in fundraising, is there any advice or tips you can give to someone who's starting out?
I think the biggest one is to have a really solid foundation for your health. I'm not just talking mental health, I mean physical health. A lot of the work is extremely demanding. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I've worked in probably 10 different organizations even before I started this business. And burnout is a real thing, because when you're helping others, they say your glass needs to be half full or maybe even overflowing before you can help others. Right. So if your glass is empty, if you're running on fumes, you're not going to be able to help other people. And it can be really emotionally draining. I remember my first week after university, I was working for a food bank, and I remember just like the impact that had on me. It was actually emotionally draining to do that work, because it's complex issues. You're coming across people who are really struggling. And then, on other days, it can be really positive and really amazing and energizing. I also want to share that working in nonprofit and charity, may be called nonprofit, but you still get paid. In fact, you can get paid really well depending on where you go. The longer you spend the time doing the work, the higher likelihood that you're going to be paid accordingly. And benefits are often included in most organizations. There's performance pay. There are bonuses. You can be salaried. You can have restrictions so that you're not working 24/7, that you work during business hours, and maybe the occasional evening work, maybe the occasional weekend. But I think mental health is number one, because I have seen a lot of folks burn out. And so be prepared that nonprofit work is often endless. The issues are ever growing, and the need for people to actually take leadership in that field is growing. And so I hope the listeners of your podcast will want to step up and bring all the knowledge and experience they have from various sectors and take leadership in this sector, which I think is the most important sector of the economy, of course.
Amazing. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's not often, listed when we talk about the different industries that are out there, but it makes up a huge percentage of employment opportunities. And then not to mention, the hundreds of thousands of people that volunteer and actually help to drive these causes forward. So that's definitely an important consideration from someone like you, who's, like you said, you've been involved in all kinds of organizations. Amazing. So when it comes to inspiration or education, things that you turn to for, knowledge, whatever it is, to keep up to date. Are there any
Yeah.
resources that you turn to, or any books or podcasts or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, there are certain books out there. I would categorize them as sort of self-help books, which I love. Authors like Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits, Jim Collins, Good to Great.
Yes.
There's a book I'm reading right now called Traction. You know, it's about how to really get your business going. These are books that I think nonprofit leaders need to read, because the books are talking a lot about business. And I think in nonprofit, one of the biggest challenges that we face is we think like nonprofit. We think in a way that, you know, we need to keep asking for handouts, and
Right.
we constantly want things donated. We need to start thinking differently. We need to think like businesses, because the most effective nonprofits are run like a business. And actually, a nonprofit organization is a business. It's just categorized as not-for-profit. The profits that are generated do not go back to the shareholders.
Right.
It's owned by the community. Those profits are reinvested, but it's a business. So we need to run it like a business. And you know, this is why DoGood Fundraising is a social enterprise business and not a nonprofit, right? Because I think we can make a big difference, but we can also make money and get paid fairly, and everyone deserves to be paid well. And so again, it comes back to what I was saying about decent work. If you want to be paid and respected in your organization, you need to learn how to operate efficiently and do it in a way so that you have a healthy mix of revenues. That might include grants, that might include earned revenue from the sales of goods or services, that might include donations. But this is business, right? And so you need to read what business leaders are saying. You know, and you know, Good to Great is one of those books that tells you from major Fortune 500 companies all over the world, how did they do things right? And so it has a lot of case studies in there that I think folks should look at. Traction does the same thing. I'm just reading it. I'm halfway through, and it gives you examples of where people have done things really well and where they've gone wrong. And we need to learn from other people and do it quickly so that we can start to solve some of the big issues in society that are really in need of being resolved.
Amazing. I think that's super powerful. And a lot of times people are focused on the actual issue they're trying to solve, but not necessarily what's the most effective way to get there, right? Because ultimately, we want to create an actual impact, right? We want to create a sustainable impact. So looking at it from that perspective is great. Those are 3 amazing books you recommended. Love that perspective. So we're essentially wrapping up, but I just wanted to get you to you know, if someone has no idea, they've never worked with an organization before to get funding, okay? Right. So they have an established organization, let's say they're surviving off of donors or something. What does the process look like to work with DoGood? What is that? If you could just kind of explain it, a brief step-by-step process.
Sure. So we generally start by understanding what it is that they're raising money for and how much money do they need to raise. A question I often ask prospective clients is, if you had $50,000 tomorrow, what would you do with it? So you have to have a clear idea of what change you're trying to create. Right. We usually call this the mission. So having a clear and defined mission, you know, that we're... for instance, we're going to ensure that children ages 5 to 12 receive a healthy, nutritious breakfast every day, right? That could be a mission.
Yep.
And that's something you can probably achieve within 5 years. So I think having an achievable mission, which is reasonable and realistic within a few years, is a huge step. And then knowing what you would do with that money. So let's say with that $50,000, you would hire a part-time coordinator to coordinate the movement of those breakfasts. You would actually purchase some of the food items, the breakfasts, and then maybe you would track, you know, in a specific geography or neighborhood, how many young people are getting that and what kind of an impact is that having. So that tells me you're ready. Yep. You can come up with a budget. You've defined your strategy very well. You have a clear goal, targets, you know what to do with those targets. And so this is all you need to know. We take care of the rest, right? So we have a process. It's called our all-inclusive grant writing process. We write the grant from start to finish. We're very well trained on how to take your ideas and put it into writing using words that the funder is going to understand and be happy with. And in a given year, we have about 20 to 30 grants that are called our priority grants. So the priority grants are the most important ones that we really advertise. We focus on them. We do them really well. We're good at it. We also win those grants. And so those are the ones that we put a lot of emphasis on, like the Ontario Trillium Foundation funds. And so we can take your concept, your clear mission, your clear definition of how you're going to achieve success, your metrics, your budget. We can take all that and we can communicate that in a way that funders get it, and we'll also help you jump through all the administrative hoops, all the documentation, the logins, and using all these various portals. We'll take care of all that and make it easy. And not every grant writer can do that. So we don't just have subject matter expertise, we're also very good at process. Right. And so I think that's sort of what somebody would need to know if they're starting out. You could do it yourself, but working with us, you're probably going to have a higher chance of success. Which is great. Sounds like it's a very well-oiled machine and a very effective process for someone who's has a great project, has a great cause, and is looking to actually help fund that and expand it. So thank you so much, Rohit. For anyone who's interested, you could check out DoGoodFundraising.ca. Yep. And thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Dan. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of Growth for Good. The show is presented by Daniel Does and produced by Creator Club in Toronto. You can find notes, links, and more about my guests at danieldoes.co, where you can also learn about ways we can collaborate. Feel free to connect with me anytime on LinkedIn or Twitter. If there is someone from the sector that you'd like to learn from or you'd like to be interviewed on the show, feel free to reach out to team@danieldoes.co. If you're considering creating a podcast or video series for your organization, connect with Creator Club at creatorclubstudios.com.